Nathaniel Rivers was laughing loudly when Vivian said, "That woman doesn't belong in this house." Elena, his pregnant sister, stood trembling in the rain with her suitcase. What came out of Nathaniel's mouth next made Vivian's confidence crumble forever. The sound of Nathaniel Rivers' luxury sedan echoed through the circular driveway as raindrops pelted the windshield of his midnight black vehicle. After 30 grueling days of negotiations in Tokyo, all he wanted was the familiar comfort of his sprawling estate, and perhaps a quiet evening reviewing the contracts that would expand his tech empire into Asian markets. The automatic gates closed behind him with their usual soft mechanical hum, sealing off the outside world from his sanctuary of manicured lawns and pristine architecture. But something was wrong. Through the heavy downpour, he spotted a figure huddled near the ornate fountain at the center of his driveway, a woman with a suitcase, soaked to the bone and trembling. As his headlights illuminated her face, recognition hit him like a physical blow. Elena, his younger sister, sat on the cold stone edge of the fountain, her 6-month pregnant belly visible beneath her drenched coat, tears mixing with rainwater as she clutched a single piece of luggage. Nathaniel killed the engine and rushed from his car, his expensive Italian shoes splashing through puddles as he ran toward her. "Elena, you're supposed to be inside resting. What are you doing out here in this storm?" Her eyes, red and swollen from crying, met his with a mixture of relief and desperation that made his chest tighten with alarm. Before she could respond, the front door of the mansion swung open with dramatic flair. Vivian Blackwood emerged, her gray hair perfectly styled despite the late hour, wearing the crisp uniform that had become her signature during 5 years of service to the Rivers family. Her expression carried an air of righteous indignation as she stepped onto the covered porch, arms crossed, watching the reunion with calculated coldness. "Mr. Rivers," she called out in her most professional tone, "I tried to explain to your sister that this arrangement simply isn't working out. A pregnant woman requires specialized care that I'm not equipped to provide, and frankly, her emotional outbursts have been quite disruptive to the household routine." Elena flinched at Vivian's words, instinctively wrapping her arms around her belly, as if protecting her unborn child from the verbal assault. Nathaniel felt something dark and protective surge through his chest as he helped his sister to her feet, noting how she seemed smaller and more fragile than when he'd left for his business trip. Vivian continued with practiced authority, explaining how Elena had become increasingly difficult, how she'd been making unreasonable demands, and how the situation had simply become untenable for everyone involved. But as Nathaniel looked into his sister's frightened eyes and then back at Vivian's perfectly composed face, a memory surfaced from years past, his late wife Sarah's gentle voice expressing concerns about their housekeeper's true nature, worries he'd dismissed as pregnancy hormones and emotional sensitivity. Standing in the rain with his vulnerable sister clinging to his arm, Nathaniel finally understood that Sarah's instincts had been trying to warn him about something much darker than he'd ever imagined. Inside the warmth of the mansion's marble foyer, Nathaniel wrapped Elena in his jacket while studying Vivian's demeanor with newfound scrutiny. The housekeeper moved with practiced efficiency, preparing tea and offering towels, her every gesture a performance of concerned professionalism. She spoke in measured tones about Elena's alleged difficulties adjusting to the household routine, painting herself as the long-suffering caretaker who had tried everything to accommodate the pregnant woman's needs. Vivian had mastered the art of manipulation through years of observing wealthy families, learning to mirror their expectations while pursuing her own agenda. She understood that men like Nathaniel, consumed by business and still grieving their losses, preferred minimal domestic disruption and clear, simple explanations for complex problems. Her strategy had always been to position herself as the solution rather than the source of household troubles, deflecting attention from her true activities through careful presentation of facts. Elena sat quietly on the leather sofa, occasionally glancing toward Vivian with an expression that Nathaniel was beginning to recognize as fear rather than mere discomfort. When the housekeeper left to prepare the guest room, Elena's entire posture changed, her shoulders relaxing slightly as she whispered urgent words about locked doors, hidden documents, and strange phone calls that Vivian had intercepted during Nathaniel's absence. Her voice carried the tremor of someone who had been systematically undermined and isolated. The pregnancy had made Elena more vulnerable than usual, both physically and emotionally, especially after losing her husband in a car accident just months before. She had come to Nathaniel seeking the comfort of family, hoping to grieve and prepare for motherhood in a safe environment. Instead, she found herself trapped in a psychological prison, where her every move was monitored, her communications controlled, and her growing belly used as evidence of her supposed instability and neediness. Vivian returned with fresh linens and a concerned expression, explaining how she'd discovered Elena attempting to access Nathaniel's private office earlier that day, suggesting it might be related to pregnancy hormones affecting judgment and impulse control. She spoke with the authority of someone who had researched pregnancy complications specifically to weaponize them in conversations like this one. Her performance was flawless, combining genuine medical knowledge with carefully crafted implications that painted Elena as unreliable and potentially dangerous to herself. But Nathaniel was beginning to see through the carefully constructed narrative. Elena's behavior patterns didn't match his memories of her steady, practical nature, and Vivian's explanations felt too neat, too convenient. Something fundamental had shifted during his absence, and the woman he'd trusted with his home and family had somehow become the architect of his sister's suffering, using his own grief and emotional distance as tools to maintain control over a situation that was spiraling into something much darker than simple household tension. In the quiet sanctuary of Nathaniel's study, Elena finally found the courage to reveal the extent of her ordeal. Her hands shook as she described waking to find her bedroom door locked from the outside, being told that Nathaniel had specifically requested she not contact him during his trip, and discovering that her prenatal vitamins had been replaced with generic medications that made her feel drowsy and confused. The isolation had been gradual but relentless, each restriction presented as being for her own good or following Nathaniel's supposed instructions. Vivian had exploited Elena's pregnancy symptoms with cruel precision, dismissing her complaints of dizziness as normal morning sickness while secretly ensuring she remained weak and dependent. Meals were often delayed or forgotten entirely, justified by claims that pregnant women shouldn't overeat, while doctors' appointments were mysteriously canceled due to supposed scheduling conflicts. Elena had begun to doubt her own perceptions, wondering if her grief and hormones were making her paranoid about behaviors that might have innocent explanations. The psychological warfare had been particularly insidious because Vivian understood exactly how to frame each cruelty as care. When Elena expressed concerns about being locked in her room, Vivian explained it was for security reasons and that Nathaniel worried about her sleepwalking in her condition. When communication with the outside world was restricted, it was presented as protecting her from stress that might harm the baby. Each lie was crafted to exploit Elena's love for her unborn child and her trust in her brother's judgment. Nathaniel listened with growing horror as he realized how his emotional withdrawal after Sarah's passing had created the perfect opportunity for Vivian's manipulation. His grief had made him grateful for any household management that required minimal involvement, and he'd interpreted Vivian's increasing control as dedication rather than exploitation. Elena had tried to reach him multiple times, but her calls had been intercepted, and her concerns dismissed as emotional instability related to her pregnancy and recent loss. The guilt hit Nathaniel like a physical weight as he understood how his sister's vulnerability had been weaponized against her. Elena had needed protection and support during the most challenging period of her life, and instead, she'd found herself imprisoned in what should have been a safe haven. Her pregnancy had progressed without proper medical supervision. Her grief had been compounded by isolation, and her trust in family had been systematically eroded through calculated psychological manipulation. As Elena spoke about lying awake at night, feeling her baby move while wondering if anyone would believe her stories about Vivian's true nature, Nathaniel realized that his sister's suffering represented a profound failure on his part. Sarah had tried to warn him, Elena had tried to reach him, and he had been too consumed by his own pain to recognize that evil had taken root in his home, disguised as devoted service and wearing the mask of professional concern. The investigation began subtly, with Nathaniel paying closer attention to the rhythms and details of his household that he had previously ignored. He noticed how Vivian's explanations for various situations changed, depending on who was present, how she positioned herself to monitor conversations, and how Elena's behavior shifted noticeably whenever the housekeeper entered a room. Small inconsistencies began accumulating into a pattern that suggested deliberate deception rather than innocent miscommunication. Financial records revealed troubling discrepancies that Nathaniel had previously attributed to household expenses and medical costs related to Elena's pregnancy. Vivian had access to household accounts for legitimate purchases, but careful examination showed charges for items that had never appeared in the house, medical consultations that Elena swore had never occurred, and cash withdrawals that seemed excessive for normal household operations. The documentation was expertly managed, with just enough legitimate expenses mixed in to provide plausible cover. Electronic surveillance of phone calls and mail revealed that Vivian had been intercepting communications systematically, not just Elena's attempts to contact Nathaniel, but also calls from doctors, friends, and even the grief counselor that Elena had been seeing before moving into the mansion. Vivian had created an elaborate network of lies, telling callers that Elena was too unwell to speak or that she had specifically requested no contact while she focused on her pregnancy and recovery from her loss. The physical evidence was more subtle, but equally disturbing. Elena's room showed signs of external locks that had been recently installed and carefully disguised, while her personal belongings had been systematically relocated to areas where Vivian could monitor access. Prescription medications had been switched with similar-looking alternatives, and Elena's personal documents, including insurance information and legal papers related to her deceased husband's estate, had been photographed and copied without her knowledge. Nathaniel discovered that Vivian had been researching Elena's inheritance and insurance policies, apparently calculating the financial impact of various scenarios involving Elena's health and her unborn child. The research was thorough and methodical, suggesting that the manipulation had specific financial goals rather than being merely psychological cruelty. Vivian had positioned herself to benefit from Elena's vulnerability in ways that went far beyond simple household theft. Most chilling was the realization that Vivian had been documenting Elena's emotional responses to stress, building what appeared to be a case for Elena's mental instability that could potentially be used to challenge her competency in legal matters. The systematic nature of the psychological manipulation suggested that Vivian had experience with this type of exploitation, and that Elena might not be her first victim. Nathaniel began to understand that he was dealing with someone whose cruelty was both calculated and professional, someone who had turned the care of vulnerable people into a sophisticated criminal enterprise. While searching through Sarah's personal belongings in their former bedroom, a space he had avoided since her passing, Nathaniel discovered a letter hidden inside her jewelry box, dated just weeks before her death. The envelope bore his name in Sarah's careful handwriting, with a note indicating it should be opened only if something happened to her, or if he ever had concerns about Vivian's behavior. His hands trembled as he unfolded the pages, recognizing his late wife's distinctive script but noting an urgency in her writing that he had never seen before. Sarah's letter detailed observations about Vivian that she had accumulated over months of careful attention, patterns of behavior that had initially seemed like quirks, but gradually revealed themselves as something much darker. She wrote about catching Vivian going through private papers, overhearing phone conversations where the housekeeper spoke about the family's finances and routines to unknown parties, and witnessing small cruelties toward elderly neighbors who occasionally visited the estate for social gatherings that Sarah had hosted. The letter revealed that Sarah had begun to fear for her own safety during her final months, not because of her illness, but because of Vivian's increasingly intrusive behavior. Sarah had noticed medications being moved or replaced, important medical appointment reminders disappearing, and conversations with doctors being monitored or interrupted in ways that seemed designed to prevent her from communicating her concerns effectively. She had started keeping her own records and hiding important documents because she no longer trusted that her possessions were secure. Most devastating was Sarah's expression of concern about what might happen to future family members who might be vulnerable in Vivian's care. She had specifically worried about elderly relatives or anyone who might be dependent on Vivian's assistance. Recognizing that the housekeeper's manipulation tactics were refined and systematic rather than impulsive or emotional, Sarah had researched Vivian's employment history and discovered gaps and inconsistencies that suggested previous problems, though specific details were difficult to verify. The letter concluded with specific instructions for investigation, including hidden locations where Sarah had secured copies of documents and recordings that demonstrated Vivian's suspicious activities. Sarah had been building a case against the housekeeper while battling her own illness, driven by love for her husband and determination to protect him from someone she recognized as a predator. Her final words expressed regret that her illness had prevented her from taking direct action and hope that Nathaniel would find the strength to uncover the truth. Reading his wife's urgent warnings while Elena slept fitfully in the guest room, Nathaniel felt the full weight of his failures and missed opportunities. Sarah had tried to protect him even while dying, and he had been too consumed by grief to recognize her gift of insight and preparation. The letter transformed his understanding of both his wife's final months and his current situation, providing him with both the evidence he needed and the emotional motivation to honor Sarah's memory by protecting his family from the predator she had identified. Armed with Sarah's detailed instructions, Nathaniel installed hidden cameras throughout the mansion while maintaining his normal business schedule to avoid alerting Vivian to his suspicions. The surveillance equipment, sophisticated but nearly invisible, captured audio and video from multiple angles in common areas, hallways, and, most importantly, near Elena's room. Within days, the footage revealed a pattern of behavior that exceeded even his worst expectations about Vivian's true nature. The recordings showed Vivian entering Elena's room while his sister slept, searching through personal belongings and photographing documents with her phone. More disturbing were the audio captures of Vivian speaking to Elena during the day, using a tone of voice completely different from the professional courtesy she displayed when Nathaniel was present. Her words were calculated to increase Elena's anxiety about her pregnancy, her grief, and her place in the household, delivered with the precision of someone experienced in psychological manipulation. One particularly chilling recording captured Vivian deliberately withholding Elena's prescribed prenatal vitamins while explaining that the dosage needed to be adjusted according to doctor's orders that had never been given. When Elena questioned the changes, Vivian responded with manufactured concern about pregnancy complications and fetal development issues, using Elena's natural protective instincts about her unborn child to enforce compliance with restrictions that had no medical basis. The surveillance also revealed Vivian's phone conversations with unknown parties, discussing the Rivers family's financial situation, Elena's inheritance prospects, and timeline estimates for various scenarios involving Elena's emotional breakdown or medical complications. These conversations suggested that Vivian was part of a larger network of people who specialized in exploiting vulnerable individuals within wealthy households, sharing techniques and coordinating activities across multiple targets. Most damning was footage of Vivian tampering with Elena's food and medication, not enough to cause immediate harm but sufficient to maintain the constant low-level illness that supported her narrative about pregnancy complications and emotional instability. The systematic nature of the abuse was breathtaking in its cruelty, designed to slowly erode Elena's physical health, mental stability, and credibility, while positioning Vivian as the indispensable caregiver managing a difficult situation. The cameras also captured Vivian's reaction when she thought she was completely unobserved, moments when her carefully maintained facade dropped to reveal expressions of contempt and calculation that chilled Nathaniel to his core. During these unguarded moments, she spoke to herself about Elena with language that was viciously dehumanizing, referring to his sister as nothing more than a profitable opportunity that required careful management until maximum benefit could be extracted. Watching his sister's daily suffering while understanding the deliberate cruelty behind each element of her experience, Nathaniel felt his grief transform into something harder and more focused. Vivian had not only betrayed his trust and exploited his family's vulnerability, she had turned his home into a prison designed to destroy the people he loved most. The confrontation came on a rain-soaked evening, exactly 1 week after Nathaniel's return, as thunder rolled across the estate and lightning illuminated the mansion's windows with dramatic intensity. Nathaniel had spent the day reviewing all the evidence he had accumulated: Sarah's letter, financial records, surveillance footage, and Elena's detailed testimony, building an unshakable case that would leave no room for Vivian's manipulative explanations or false justifications. He found Vivian in the kitchen, preparing what she claimed was a special herbal tea for Elena's anxiety, though the surveillance had revealed she had been adding substances that actually increased stress and confusion rather than providing comfort. When Nathaniel entered the room, Vivian launched into her familiar routine of concerned professionalism, explaining how Elena had experienced another difficult day and needed extra support to manage her emotional challenges during this delicate stage of pregnancy. "Vivian," he said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of controlled intensity that had made him successful in boardrooms around the world, "we need to discuss Elena's care and your employment with this family." He watched her face carefully, noting how quickly she shifted into defensive mode while maintaining her facade of innocent dedication. She began explaining how demanding Elena had become, how her grief and pregnancy hormones created an impossible situation, and how she had been struggling to provide adequate care despite Elena's unreasonable expectations. But Nathaniel interrupted her practiced monologue by placing a tablet on the kitchen counter, queuing up the surveillance footage that showed her entering Elena's room at night, tampering with medications, and speaking on the phone about exploiting the family's financial situation. The color drained from Vivian's face as she watched herself perform actions that could not be explained away as misunderstandings or medical necessity, her carefully constructed world of plausible denial crumbling in real time. The transformation was remarkable and terrifying as Vivian's professional mask finally slipped completely, revealing the calculating predator that Sarah's letter had warned him about. Her voice changed from servile concern to cold calculation as she attempted to negotiate, suggesting that Elena was genuinely unstable and that removing Vivian's management would result in tragic consequences for both Elena and her unborn child. She had researched legal precedents for postpartum depression and pregnancy-related mental health issues, positioning herself as the only thing standing between Elena and complete psychological collapse. When negotiation failed, Vivian's demeanor shifted again, this time to barely contained rage as she revealed her true contempt for the Rivers family and her belief that wealthy people deserved to be exploited by those clever enough to manipulate their emotions and guilt. Her final words before Nathaniel called the authorities were a venomous prediction that Elena would never recover from the trauma of pregnancy and loss, that the baby would suffer from his mother's instability, and that removing Vivian's care would destroy what remained of their family. The arrival of law enforcement transformed the mansion from a private confrontation into a crime scene, with detectives documenting evidence while social workers ensured Elena's immediate safety and medical care. Nathaniel had contacted his attorney before initiating the confrontation, ensuring that proper legal procedures would be followed and that Elena's testimony would be protected by appropriate advocacy. The investigation moved swiftly once authorities reviewed the overwhelming documentation of systematic abuse and financial exploitation. Detective Maria Santos, who specialized in elder abuse and vulnerable adult protection, recognized patterns in Vivian's behavior that matched cases she had investigated at other wealthy households throughout the region. Vivian's network of contacts included individuals with access to multiple domestic positions, creating a web of exploitation that had operated for years without detection. The investigation revealed that Elena was not Vivian's first victim, though she might have been the intended final target in a scheme designed to establish permanent control over the Rivers estate. The financial evidence was particularly damning, showing systematic theft that went beyond simple household embezzlement to include identity manipulation and insurance fraud. Vivian had been gradually establishing legal grounds to challenge Elena's competency while positioning herself as the primary caregiver, with potential claims on both Elena's inheritance and Nathaniel's estate in the event of family tragedy. Her research into pregnancy complications and postpartum depression was intended to support a long-term strategy of psychological manipulation. Medical examination of Elena revealed the extent of physical manipulation she had endured, including malnutrition, masked as pregnancy symptoms, and medication interactions that could have seriously endangered both her health and her baby's development. The systematic nature of the medical abuse required treatment by specialists who understood how to reverse the effects of deliberate poisoning designed to mimic natural health complications. Community response was swift and supportive, with neighbors who had witnessed concerning incidents during Nathaniel's absence providing additional testimony that corroborated the surveillance evidence. Several elderly residents of the area reported similar experiences with domestic workers who had exhibited behavior patterns matching Vivian's methods, leading to a broader investigation that ultimately exposed an organized criminal network specializing in the exploitation of vulnerable individuals within affluent communities. The legal proceedings resulted in criminal convictions for elder abuse, fraud, theft, assault, and conspiracy, with Vivian receiving significant prison time and permanent prohibition from working in caregiving positions. More importantly for Elena, the investigation provided official validation of her experiences and access to specialized medical and psychological support designed to help victims of systematic abuse recover their health and confidence. The resolution brought justice not only for Elena but for other victims whose suffering had been hidden by the same methods of isolation and credibility destruction that Vivian had perfected. The case became a model for detecting and prosecuting domestic abuse that targeted vulnerable adults through manipulation of trust relationships within wealthy households. The healing process began slowly, with Elena requiring months of specialized medical care to reverse the effects of systematic poisoning and malnutrition that had been disguised as pregnancy complications. Her doctor, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, worked closely with toxicology specialists to identify and counteract the substances that Vivian had been administering, while nutritionists developed a recovery plan that supported both Elena's health and her baby's continued development. The psychological healing proved even more complex, requiring therapy that specialized in recovering from gaslighting and systematic manipulation. Nathaniel restructured his entire approach to business and family, recognizing that his emotional withdrawal had created the vulnerability that predators like Vivian could exploit. He hired a reputable family management company that conducted thorough background checks and provided ongoing supervision of all household staff, ensuring that no single individual could gain the kind of unchecked power that had made Elena's abuse possible. More importantly, he committed to remaining emotionally present and actively involved in his family's daily welfare. The mansion underwent both practical and symbolic transformation, with security systems updated to protect against internal threats rather than just external ones, and Elena's living space redesigned to ensure her privacy and autonomy while providing the support she needed during her pregnancy recovery. Nathaniel also established protocols for regular check-ins with family members and clear communication channels that could not be intercepted or manipulated by household staff. Elena's pregnancy progressed successfully once proper medical care was restored, though the trauma of her experience required ongoing psychological support to ensure she could bond with her baby without fear or anxiety. Her grief counseling resumed with a therapist who understood how abuse trauma could complicate the natural grieving process, helping her process both the loss of her husband and the betrayal she had experienced in what should have been a safe environment. The relationship between Nathaniel and Elena deepened as they worked together to rebuild trust and communication that had been systematically undermined by Vivian's manipulation. Elena's strength and resilience impressed her brother, while his commitment to making amends for his absence helped heal wounds that went beyond the immediate abuse she had suffered. They spent hours talking about Sarah's warnings and Elena's attempts to communicate her distress, understanding how manipulation had prevented their natural family bonds from protecting her. As Elena's due date approached, the mansion had transformed from a place of isolation and fear into a home where family connections were prioritized and protected. Elena felt secure enough to prepare for motherhood with excitement rather than anxiety, knowing that her child would be born into an environment where love was actively expressed and vulnerability was met with protection rather than exploitation. The healing had required acknowledging painful truths about past failures, but it had also revealed the strength of family bonds that could survive even systematic attempts to destroy them. 2 years after that rain-soaked confrontation, the Rivers estate hummed with the joyful chaos of family life truly lived. Elena's son, David, named after his late father, toddled through gardens that his uncle had redesigned to be safe for exploring children, his laughter echoing off walls that had once witnessed silent suffering. Elena had blossomed into confident motherhood, her natural warmth and strength fully restored as she raised her son in an environment where his curiosity was celebrated and his safety was genuinely protected. Nathaniel had discovered that genuine family care enhanced rather than competed with professional success, as his business thrived under the leadership of someone who had learned to balance achievement with human connection. His companies had expanded internationally, but he maintained strict boundaries that prevented work from consuming the emotional energy needed for family relationships. Elena often teased him about how much happier he seemed compared to the distant, grief-stricken man she had tried to reach during those dark months. The new household staff, carefully vetted and properly supervised, had become extended family members who genuinely cared about Elena and David's welfare rather than viewing them as opportunities for exploitation. Maria Gonzalez, the head housekeeper, brought warmth and competence to the role while understanding that her position was based on trust that had to be continuously earned rather than automatically granted. The difference in atmosphere was remarkable, with the mansion feeling alive and welcoming rather than controlled and oppressive. Elena had channeled her experience into advocacy work, speaking at conferences about recognizing and preventing domestic abuse within wealthy households where victims might be isolated by their circumstances rather than their poverty. Her testimony had helped strengthen legal protections for vulnerable adults and improved training for law enforcement officers who investigated these cases. She took particular pride in knowing that other families had been protected from predators like Vivian because of lessons learned from her ordeal. David's nursery occupied the room where Elena had once been imprisoned, transformed into a space filled with light, color, and the sounds of healthy childhood development. Elena sometimes stood in the doorway holding her son while remembering the darkness that had once filled this space, marveling at how completely love could transform environments that had been designed for suffering. Her son would grow up knowing that family meant protection, support, and unconditional love rather than manipulation and control. The story of their recovery had become a testament to the truth that Sarah had written in her hidden letter. Evil may disguise itself as care, but genuine love creates environments where truth, dignity, and safety flourish naturally. Evil had been punished, good had been rewarded, and justice had been built through truth, courage, and unconditional love. What would you do to protect the people you love? How would you recognize if someone in your care was suffering in silence? The answers to these questions matter because somewhere, another family needs the courage to say enough.